Greetings, fellow cultivators. Welcome to Autonova. Remember to like and subscribe to support the journey. Now, let's dive into the next chapter of A Will Eternal. The disappearance of Bai Xiaochun ushered the peoples of the starry sky into a new age. No one could see him, but he remained where he had always been, in the former location of the eternal immortal domains, his eyes closed as he sought enlightenment of essence. Days passed. Years passed. One day, Bai Xiaochun opened his eyes, only the second time he had done so since he began to meditate. The first time was when he created heavenly tribulation. This time was because he had gained enlightenment of everything. He had witnessed the rise of life. He had created the sun and moon and all living beings. He had observed the darkness and the light of the starry sky. He had been present as living creatures became many, and had sought enlightenment through countless tens upon tens of thousands of years. Now, when he opened his eyes, it was possible to see a boundless calmness and purity deep therein. He was so pure that he seemed untainted by even a speck of dust. In some ways, his eyes were like a newborn child's as he looked out at the stars. Back when I fought the mortal renegade, I asked myself, what is essence? I had trouble with that question for a long time, but now, I understand. I know what essence is. Essence has no form or shape. It's almost like it doesn't even exist, but simultaneously, it creates and contains every form and shape. Essence has no beginning or end, but simultaneously, creates and contains the beginning and end of everything. Although he only murmured the words softly, they caused all of the 1,080,000 worlds to tremble. Essence takes up no space, but simultaneously, creates and contains all space. Essence exists outside of time, but simultaneously, creates and contains all time. With these sentences having been uttered, all of the natural laws in the starry sky, as well as all the magical laws, began to resonate. Essence is noiseless and lightless, but simultaneously, creates and contains all sound and light. Essence does not exist in any one specific place, but simultaneously, creates and contains all places. As Bai Xiaochun smiled and spoke these fifth and sixth sentences, all the living beings throughout the starry sky became still and quiet. In that silence, Bai Xiaochun spoke his final two sentences. Essence is infinitely small, but simultaneously, infinitely large. Essence is completely unique, and completely boundless. Radiant colors suddenly appeared within the silent starry sky. Countless natural and magical laws fused, and then dispersed. The starry sky vanished, leaving behind only a single point. It was a singularity of absolutely no length, breadth, or depth. That singularity existed within the starry sky. It contained all magical laws, all natural laws, and a total of 1,080,000 worlds. When Bai Xiaochun saw that, he smiled. Waving his finger, he caused the singularity to transform into a line. It had no breadth or depth, and yet, was infinitely long, with no end. I'm missing something, aren't I? After a moment of thought, he waved his finger again, and the infinitely long line suddenly became infinitely wide. Because it was infinitely long and wide, it was actually impossible to tell which direction was which. Such descriptions could only exist in one's thoughts. From a distance, it almost looked like an enormous sheet of paper, spread out through the starry sky. Bai Xiaochun looked at it for a moment, smiled again, and then waved his hand, causing it to grow infinitely deep and high. Now, it didn't look like a piece of paper, but rather, an infinitely wide, infinitely long, infinitely tall box. Still missing something. Shaking his head, Bai Xiaochun waved his finger, causing the infinitely long, wide, and tall box to ripple and distort. It seemed to age, blurring, as though the passage of time was transforming it into something illusory, into a vortex, into space. It contained everything that made up the starry sky for the past tens of thousands of years, their existences stretched out together. It contained all life forms and all living beings, from the moment they were born until they died, from the moment they existed, until they didn't exist. And everything in between. By stepping into that space, one could appear at any moment that had ever existed. Bai Xiaochun looked at this world made of time and space, and quietly said, "This is the same vortex that holy extermination opened with those Tao domain treasures of his. This is how the river of time and space appears." He extended his right hand, and visible within it was a golden leaf, the very same leaf that he had found in the bloodstream sect, along with the little turtle. Way back then, he had no way to understand what that leaf was. After reaching the sovereign realm, and beginning his search for enlightenment, he had occasionally studied it, but had gained little as a result. But now, as he looked down at the leaf, everything became clear. Interesting. No wonder I was never able to understand what this leaf was. It is actually made of a vast number of unique leaves, all with different overlapping vein patterns. Because the veins are transparent, they are impossible to see. But with my current divine sense, I can see them now, each and every vein. As for the information contained therein, he looked closer, eyes glinting with curiosity, until he finally smiled again. Well, what's this? The cultivation system of the never-ending Tao domain is divided into steps. First step, second step, third step, fourth step. The fourth step is the last. Only by practicing cultivation to that level can an almighty being see the truth about this leaf. Apparently, the Tao domain treasures that holy extermination used contained the full power of the fourth step. Bai Xiaochun smiled. Although the leaf did not look like anything particularly unique, he could now see that it could actually act as a key that lead to the never-ending Tao domain. There is more I can do. He looked with narrowed eyes at the vortex of space and time that he had created. As he did, his eyes reflected the countless beams of light from the dimensions therein. There were too many to count, each of which contained innumerable living beings, all with their own unique destinies. However, his mere act of looking at the dimensions caused them to tremble unstably, as though they might collapse at any moment. With that, he looked away, and everything vanished. The expression of space and time that he had created vanished, and the starry sky went back to normal. It's not that I'm incapable of doing it, but rather, this starry sky can't sustain such a dramatic transformation. Based on the descriptions from the never-ending Tao domain, doesn't that imply that there's a fifth step which they haven't encountered yet? I should pay a visit to the never-ending Tao domain, and see if their starry sky can sustain such a transformation. Having made his decision, he ignored the leaf. What is the eternal? He asked himself. A moment passed, and he shook his head. How could there truly be something eternal? According to the people from the never-ending Tao domain, their fourth step is the eternal realm. But if there is something uniquely eternal, perhaps it's just one's power of imagination. He sighed. Imagination is the most powerful force there is. Essentially, imagination is will. Take, for example, the first time I saw the moonflower seeds spreading out. I remember being moved because I was born from the very thoughts of the original arch-ancestor, from his imagination. And all of the eternal sons were born from the eternal mother in the same way. He closed his eyes, and could almost see the eternal mother letting loose a cloud of dandelion seeds, all of them containing her will, which she hoped would eventually grow into children, one of whom would bring an end to the great catastrophe. Those expressions of will became the three sovereigns, who, in the moment before their death, released their own will. One fragment of that will contained something that Bai Xiaochun recognized as his own aura. Laughing softly, he rose to his feet. As he did, everything around him vanished, and he took a step forward. A vortex appeared, similar to the one he had created earlier. As it spun and swirled, it opened up to reveal a boundless river. The river of time and space. He stepped forward into the river, and disappeared. As he did, he spoke, causing his words to echo out into the starry sky before eventually fading away. One will to create oceans. One will to summon mulberry fields. One will to slaughter countless devils. One will to eradicate innumerable immortals. Only my will is eternal. The river of time and space existed in another dimension. The water that made it up was formed by images of time and space itself, and contained an infinitude of human lives. Within that river, it was possible to see every person who had ever existed, or would exist, from the moment they were born, until they died. Bai Xiaochun was standing on the bank of the river, waiting for something, expression calm as he looked at the river water. Before long, the sound of rippling water could be heard, and a boat appeared. As it slid through the water, Bai Xiaochun looked over, his expression the same as ever, his gaze falling upon the boatman. He wore a wide, conical hat which obscured his face, but as he neared, he looked up, revealing ancient features to Bai Xiaochun. He smiled. Please step aboard, fellow Taoist. Bai Xiaochun smiled and nodded. After he stepped onto the boat, the old boatman began to row, and the boat floated down the river of time and space. Time passed, although it was impossible to say how much. The boatman didn't say anything, and neither did Bai Xiaochun, who simply stood quietly at the prow, looking at the water. He saw the lives of countless people, and within the rippling sound of the water, he could hear countless voices. It was all very pleasant. We've met before, Bai Xiaochun said. The boatman looked over. Smiling, he said, if stepping through time and space to discuss the Tao for a moment counts as having met, then we have indeed met, fellow Taoist. 1. Bai Xiaochun smiled. The moment he had seen this old man's face, he knew who he was. He was the owner of the precious treasure that was the hourglass. He was the master of the worldly Taoist, as well as the mortal Taoist, who eventually changed his name to Mortal Renegade. This old man had transformed himself into time itself. Continuing to row the boat, the old man said, "And why have you come here, fellow Taoist?" Continuing to stare at the water, Bai Xiaochun quietly replied, "To pick a flower." "The eternal flower." The boatman laughed. "Well, that's not going to be easy." At that point, Bai Xiaochun made a grasping motion, causing an aphrodisiac pill to suddenly appear between his fingers. When the boatman saw that pill, his laughter gurgled to a stop, and his mouth snapped shut. The truth was that although he seemed very calm on the outside, as soon as Bai Xiaochun had appeared, his heart had begun to pound with anxiety. It was only natural for him to recognize Bai Xiaochun. This was the river of time and space, and the old man was an expression of time itself. He knew everything. A mere glance at Bai Xiaochun revealed all the information about the fight with the mortal renegade, as well as everything afterward. As all of the various details had been revealed to him, he collapsed a bit inwardly, almost unable to believe everything he had seen. He could sense that Bai Xiaochun's cultivation base had already reached an unfathomable level. In fact, the old boatman had actually never considered that someone could become this powerful. This old boatman had long since reached the fourth step of cultivation, and yet, not even he would dare to consume an aphrodisiac pill created by someone as almighty as Bai Xiaochun. Perhaps with other pills, he might have taken a chance. But aphrodisiac pills seized good fortune from heaven and earth to become powerful to an indescribable degree. "I can't believe you're threatening me with an aphrodisiac pill," the old man thought. "If you don't want to listen to what I have to say, fine. There's no need for those things." He didn't dare to speak any of those words out loud. Bowing his head, he continued to row the boat through the river of time and space. Eventually, they reached a place filled with countless eternal flowers. Each and every one of the flowers contained images touched by time. Some of the images were dark and listless, while some were bright and colorful. The eternal flowers all had 5 petals, and were dazzlingly colorful. The fragrant aroma they emitted was delightful. As for the pistil of the flower, it featured a glowing sphere of light, within which was a closed eye. On each of the innumerable eternal flowers was a little turtle, who would scurry about, seemingly on the verge of hungrily gobbling up one of the petals. Among the multitude of eternal flowers, there were 2 that were particularly conspicuous, and immediately jumped out to Bai Xiaochun. After a moment, the boatman cleared his throat, looked at Bai Xiaochun, and said, "The river of time and space is supposed to contain things related to the trajectory of actual lives, just broken up into countless segments. But there is something unique and special about the eternal flower, something that is essentially halfway into the 5th step. It now contains countless possibilities, and thus, there are countless versions of the eternal flower. Each one represents a different destiny. Therefore, which one do you want?" "All of them," Bai Xiaochun replied, his eyes fixed on the eternal flowers. The boatman was inclined to glare at him, but then he thought of the level of Bai Xiaochun's cultivation base, and his aphrodisiac pills, and forced himself to remain calm. "I can't stop you," he said with a wry smile. "But what would be the point of that?" Bai Xiaochun didn't respond. He knew that such an act would be somewhat meaningless, and therefore, continued to study the eternal flowers. Just as the old boatman had said, each of the eternal flowers existed at a different point in time. Some were during his spirit stream sect days, others during the bloodstream sect days. In some, he was in the wildlands, and in quite a few, the heavenspan realm had collapsed, and he was in the eternal immortal domains. Each flower represented a different point in time, and a different destiny. And he could pick any of them that he wished. The boatman didn't try to rush him, mostly because he didn't dare to. He simply looked on. Eventually, he even pulled out a jug of alcohol from somewhere and began to drink. After some more time passed, Bai Xiaochun's gaze came to be focused on the 2 flowers he found to be most eye-catching. One of them was on the far left side of the river, the other, on the far right. They couldn't have been more opposite. After some more thought, he sent some divine sense into the eternal flower on the left. Immediately, images sprang up in his mind. He saw a village at the foot of Mount Hood. The villagers and local elders all stood at the entrance of the village, looking at a young man. The young man had sparkling eyes and fair skin, and was dressed in a homespun robe. He wasn't very tall, and at first glance, seemed very well behaved. However, he had a huge collection of axes and cleavers tucked into his garments in various places, which seemed very out of place. As Bai Xiaochun looked at the young man, the vision he was experiencing overlapped with his own memories, and he realized that if he picked this eternal flower, he would return to the beginning of everything. "Dear elders and fellow villagers, I am on my way to learn about immortal cultivation. I shall miss all of you." The young man wore a slightly pained expression, as if he couldn't bear to part with his fellow villagers. A white-haired old man stepped out of the crowd and said, "Xiaochun, ever since your dad and mom left us, oh so long ago, you You have been, he paused for a moment. Such a good kid. Don't tell me you're not interested in living forever? All you have to do is become an immortal, and then you can live forever. That's a really, really long time. Well, it's time for you to leave now. Even a baby eagle must learn to fly eventually. No matter what situations you run into out there, you have to hang in there and keep moving forward. Once you leave the village, you can't come back, because your path will always lie ahead, not behind. As other villagers offered similar exhortations, the village elder patted the young man on the shoulder and gave him a kind smile. Apparently due to all the encouragement, the young man nodded, determination flickering in his eyes. Taking one last look at his fellow villagers, he turned and walked away. The sight was so moving to the villagers that tears of excitement began to flow down their cheeks. Justice from the heavens. The weasel is finally gone. Who was it that told him they saw an immortal in the area? Whoever it was, I'm going to give you a huge reward on behalf of the village. Today is the beginning of a new era. Even as such cries began to rise up, the young man suddenly turned and trotted back into the village. Looking very determined, he cleared his throat and said, I've made up my mind. I'm not going. I'm serious. I don't want to become an immortal. All of the villagers stared at him in shock. A few of them had pulled out drums or gongs, but were now so taken aback that they dropped them onto the ground with a clattering bang. Bai Xiaochun watched the scene play out, a smile on his face. Eventually, the vision faded away, and he was once again looking at the eternal flower on the left. The starting point. The old boatman took a sip of alcohol and then said, going back to the beginning would be an excellent choice. Take your memories with you, and relive your life. Not only would you not have to worry about that possessed rebel of an apprentice of mine, but you could also rectify many of your regrets. People always have regrets, mostly decisions made from youth or inexperience. One always has pain and loss, but by reliving life, you could really make things as perfect as they could be. Definitely a good choice, that one. The old man sighed, his eyes flickering with reminiscence. It seemed that even he, who had become time itself, still had memories that caused him to sigh. Bai Xiaochun didn't say anything in response. He stood there at the prow of the boat, seemingly lost in thought. Perhaps he was weighing the old boatman's words, and thinking back to everything that had happened in his life. Eventually, the boatman finished drinking his jug of alcohol. At that point, Bai Xiaochun opened his eyes. Although he didn't speak, there was a glint deep in his eyes that no observer would ever be able to detect. Turning his head, he looked at the flower on the right. As soon as he did, images floated up in his mind, until they occupied the entirety of his sea of consciousness. This time, he was not observing the scene as if from an outside perspective. It was as if he had actually gone back in time, and not to the beginning of the story. The starry sky was dark, but at the same time, filled with starlight. That light came from the ruined worlds that Bai Xiaochun and the mortal renegade had fought over. This was the very moment in time that holy extermination had died. This time, he failed in his attempt to open the river of time and space. Before the rumbling vortex could completely form, the essence of the eternal, in the form of that mysterious energy, completely erased him out of existence. The only thing that remained was his voice, filled with infinite regret. In the very end, I still failed. As he was erased, the three great Dao domain treasures that had created the vortex fell down, and the river faded away. The vortex also disappeared. Although the eternal immortal domains were cracked and damaged to the point where they were about to fall to pieces, they still existed. Everyone was still alive, including Song Junwan, Zhou Zimo, Hu Xiaomei and Gongsun Waner. The moment of crisis had passed. The aura of the Eternal Mother gradually began to spread, and the eternal immortal domains began to recover. As for Bai Xiaochun, he looked just like he had back in those days. He had used so much life force that he was incomparably weak, but he was still smiling as he closed his eyes and began to drop down into the eternal immortal domains. As he did, a soft light from the Eternal Mother reached out to embrace him, and gently carried him down into Arch-Emperor City. Even as he lost consciousness, he could hear the voices of his friends, his family, and his children. All of them were cheering. He also heard the angry cry of the little turtle. I hate you, Bai Xiaochun. But then the voices faded away, and time began to pass. Years later, he awoke. The eternal immortal domains was still the only spot where life existed. However, instead of the black void which had surrounded it in the past, there were now a multitude of stars. They were the ruins that Bai Xiaochun had brought light to, and given enough time, that light and life force would bring new life. Now that the catastrophe of the mortal renegade had passed, life became ordinary again in the eternal immortal domains. The 5 domains were all repaired, and the eternal sea was as majestic as ever. Vegetation and other forms of life flourished on the highest mountains and in the vastest of the plains. The Saint Emperor dynasty still existed. And although the Vile Emperor dynasty didn't have a Vile Emperor anymore, Bai Xiaochun allowed the empire to survive. The eternal immortal domains continued to have three major powers. War was a thing of the past. Without the threat of the mortal renegade, and the corrosive spirit he brought with him, the Eternal Mother recovered. Whereas the Saint Emperor had once been doomed to remain as a half-sovereign, he now had hope for reaching a higher level. The only person to leave the eternal immortal domains was Song Ke. He took the treasured fan to the ruins of the immortal world, where he waited for them to recover, and for life to return. Once the chi flow of the world was restored, he would have his path to the sovereign realm. Dabao became the new arch-emperor. Although the Grand Heaven Master was very old, he still loved the exercise of power, and therefore, he and the giant Ghost King both assisted Dabao. Li Qinghao wasn't interested in the affairs of the world anymore. He and Patriarch Spirit Stream lived out in the lush mountains, far away from the affairs of the dynasty. Despite that, not a person existed in the eternal immortal domains who would ever dare to refuse a request from them. The Eternal Mother took note of this, and gave Li Qinghao a blessing of abundant life force. Big Fatty Zhang, Master God Diviner and Shu Baosai eventually became celestials, and lived happy lives. Big Fatty Zhang found a Taoist partner, as did Shu Baosai. There was little need to mention Bruiser. He was soon just as impressive as he had been back in the river-defying sect, and sired countless offspring. Bai Xiaochun's children all tread their own paths. Xiao got married to a rather shy but, at the same time, very earnest cultivator. They lived a very happy life. Most frustrating of all to Bai Xiaochun was Xiaobao. He had inherited just about every aspect of Bai Xiaochun's personality, and acted just like he would. In fact, the little turtle seemed to find a kindred spirit in him, and abandoned Bai Xiaochun to spend time with Xiaobao. The little turtle has definitely led my son astray, Bai Xiaochun thought, sighing. Worst of all was that Xiaobao loved to concoct medicine, and had inherited his father's talents in that regard. He had long since mastered the aphrodisiac pill and the fantasy pill, and had even improved on them. And he had gone on to create many new pills, much to Bai Xiaochun's consternation. In addition to spending time with his master, Bai Hao had begun to search for his own path to becoming a sovereign. At the same time, he had been tasked with watching over Xiaobao, which involved putting out a lot of fires caused by the disaster duo of Xiaobao and the little turtle. However, now that everything had settled down, Bai Xiaochun had come to the conclusion that Bai Hao needed to get married and settle down. Unfortunately, Bai Hao wasn't interested in that, and always used the excuse of having to watch over Xiaobao and the little turtle to push the matter off into the future. After this happened several times, Bai Xiaochun had a very serious and important meeting with Xiaobao, who was his true successor, to give him the responsibility of making sure Bai Hao fell in love and got married. Off to the side, the little turtle listened, and his eyes began to sparkle as he realized that he had found a new goal in life. Peace and serenity reigned. Song Junwan, Hu Xiaomei, Zhou Zimo and Gongsun Waner kept Bai Xiaochun very happy. In the end, the cultivation world had become exactly like he had always imagined it could be, free from fighting and killing. And yet, there was still one last thing he regretted. On one particular day, Bai Xiaochun was standing in a courtyard on a mountain some distance away from Arch-Emperor City, bathed by the glow of the setting sun. Turning his head, he looked off in a certain direction. That should be the place, he murmured. He took a step forward, and vanished. When he reappeared, he was in one of the distant border regions of the Vile Emperor dynasty. There, at the edge of a remote village, was a temple. It was a small temple, with 2 maple trees flanking the entrance, their leaves as red as fire. As the leaves slowly dropped from the trees and drifted to the ground, they made a particularly entrancing scene. It was evening here too, and the fiery red evening cast light onto the tiles and bricks of the temple, making it look like the prayer garment of a monk. It was very peaceful, and for a long moment, Bai Xiaochun simply stood there in front of the temple with his eyes closed, listening to the sound of scriptures being sung within the temple. The singer was a woman, her voice soft and filled with piety. As soon as he heard that voice, he thought back to memories of the past. As he stood there, he seemed to become one with the crimson evening sunlight. Time slowed as an autumn wind suddenly kicked up, lifting his hair and causing rustling sounds to rise up as the fallen leaves swirled into motion. However, it almost seemed like the leaves and the wind understood that scriptures were being sung in the temple, and did not compete with the woman who was singing them. The scene was perfect. Later, Bai Xiaochun opened his eyes, sighed, and walked toward the temple. Reaching out, he placed his hand on the red lacquered door of the temple, then pushed it open. Inside, he saw a statue of the Eternal Mother, illuminated by an oil lamp. In front of the statue was a woman, on her knees, head bowed, singing to the statue. She wore simple, homespun garments, and had long black hair that flowed down her shoulders. She almost seemed to be part of the temple around her. Bai Xiaochun stood there quietly, listening to her sing. It was a song about a lifetime devoted to religion, a lifetime spent alone in an ancient temple, with only an oil lamp for company. A moment passed, and the woman suddenly seemed to realize that she wasn't alone. But she didn't look over her shoulder. She shivered, and a tear ran down her cheek, landing on the ground in front of the oil lamp, splashing out into the shape of a flower. A flower filled with emotion and memory. Everything Bai Xiaochun had just seen faded away, becoming an eternal memory. He opened his eyes to find himself still standing at the prow of the boat in the river of time and space. After a moment, he looked away from the eternal flower on the right. The old boatman took out another jug of alcohol, took a sip, and then looked at Bai Xiaochun. That flower really suits you. It's not going back to the beginning, but neither is it the true ending. Bai Xiaochun didn't say anything, and it was impossible to tell what he was thinking. He looked at the flower on the left, and then the flower on the right, and finally, closed his eyes again. Why don't you take that flower on the right? It seems wonderful to me. Although, both of them are actually acceptable. Trying to pick between the two seems like a very difficult choice. The old man sighed. Truthfully, not even he would have an easy time making this choice. One of them features a set conclusion. Although it would conform to your desires, everything is already set. The other features endless possibilities, and a future brimming with options. Maybe you could make things more perfect. Maybe you could get rid of all your doubts, and make your future exactly the way you want it. The old man shook his head. How will you pick? Would you like to have a drink while you consider? With that, he held out his jug of alcohol. There's no need, Bai Xiaochun said. Opening his eyes, he looked out at the two flowers. Smiling, he reached out. Years passed. Ages. The eternal spirit world glittered with bright light, and its 1,080,000 worlds glowed radiantly. Generations of powerful experts came and went. Archeans. Sovereigns. As the saying goes, after the rain, the spring bamboo blossoms. These new experts became like shining stars within the eras in which they lived. The eternal immortal domains became the brightest star among all the other stars. Eventually, Bai Xiaochun left the eternal immortal domains, taking his friends and family with him. Afterward, his story became a legend, and then a myth. Even years later, people would still talk about the stories, which to some extent was the ultimate explanation of the history of the eternal immortal domains. No one knew where Bai Xiaochun went. All they could do was study the most ancient records in the Arch-Emperor dynasty, where they found only the vaguest of clues. Apparently, whoever left the records behind wanted people to know that Bai Xiaochun, along with his friends and family, had gone to some unknown location, where they would spend their days in complete happiness. People accepted this version of events, and it soon came to be official history in the eternal spirit world. With every generation that came and went, cultivators would attempt to search for Bai Xiaochun, in the hopes of personally meeting the most powerful person to ever exist. And yet, none of them ever succeeded. Outside of the eternal spirit world was a vast starry sky filled with endless mist that made it difficult to see very far in any direction. And yet, it was now possible to see someone flying through that mist at top speed, an emotional expression on his face. I did it. I finally escaped. He looked like a young man, fair and pure, dressed in a white robe. As for the expression on his face, it was one of pure delight, like a caged bird that had just been freed. Those women are too much. I'm the honest one, the sincere one. What gives them the right to bully me? He sighed. From the gleam in his eyes, it could be seen that although he wasn't any sort of villain, he was by no means the honest type. Of course, this young man was none other than Bai Xiaochun. In the ancient records it said that he took his family and friends to some unknown location to live in happiness. Although that was true, after enough time passed, Bai Xiaochun simply couldn't take it any longer. That was just his personality. It was exacerbated by the fact that Song Junwan, Zhou Zimo, Hu Xiaomei and Gongsun Wan'er were very strict with him. It eventually reached the point where he bristled with anger. They won't let any other women even talk to me. They don't let me go out alone, and they even have the audacity to say that I cause disasters wherever I go. They're worried that I'll destroy our home? I could deal with that, but then they actually forbid me from concocting medicine. What kind of a person do they think I am? Can't talk to other women? Fine. Can't go out and have fun? Fine. Can't concoct medicine? Whatever. The final straw is their bickering. Even after years of being married, no matter how much I console them, no matter how reasonable I am, we're always fighting. The last fight lasted 1,000 years. What was most maddening was that when he discussed something important with his Taoist partners, they would all look at him, and wait to see which of them he looked back at. I finally made a clean escape. They're all busy getting ready for New Year's, so at least I can get out and stretch my legs. And thus, he flew along, determined to finally have some fun. Sighing, he proceeded along, passing through vast stretches of space with each movement. As for his final destination, he had already made his decision. He would go to the home of the little turtle, the never-ending Tao domain. Upon arriving, and just before entering, his expression flickered as he noticed something floating through the vast mist. That's the aura of the 4th step. No, wait, that's the aura of the 5th step. Blinking, he reached out into the mist, causing a blur of light to fly toward his hand. It was a bottle, or more precisely, a message in a bottle. This bottle had floated for who knew how long through the misty, starry sky, until Bai Xiaochun happened across it. How amusing, he thought, blinking a few times. After looking at the bottle for a moment, he opened it and took out the contents, which consisted of a single strip of paper. Curious, he opened the paper, and immediately laughed. Who wrote this? He wanted to get rich? However, even as he chuckled, his expression flickered, as streams of karma rose up from the paper, seemingly intent on connecting to Bai Xiaochun. Eyes widening, he quickly performed an incantation gesture with his left hand to sever the karma. What a villain. Who is this guy? His Tao contains karma? And whoever touches this paper will create a promissory note to him. They'll owe him money through karma? He looked at the paper for a moment, then snorted coldly. He's so obsessed with money he's gone crazy. Another moment passed, and he waved his hand, causing a new line of text to appear on the other side of the piece of paper. What's so good about being rich? Living forever is the most important thing. I want to live forever. With that, he prepared to throw the bottle back out again. But then he hesitated, pulled the paper back out, and added another line. Never get more than one Taoist partner. Feeling very satisfied, he hoped that anyone who found the bottle in the future would listen to his advice, which was essentially the accumulation of all his life experience. Flicking his sleeve, he sent the bottle flying out into the mist, and then headed toward the never-ending Tao domain. If I ever meet that crazy bastard, I'll definitely talk some sense into him. I can't believe he dared to try to make me owe him money. Maybe I should give him a fantasy pill. Or an aphrodisiac pill. And that brings this story to an end. Thank you so much for staying with me throughout the journey. If you enjoyed the story, don't forget to like and follow the channel so you won't miss out on more exciting stories coming up. See you again in the next one.